Decay, a lot of I can't talk. Content to stay instant. They were provided that they had been sieved. Hey guys, if you're new here, welcome to my channel and thank you for watching. My name is Erica and I love books and makeup. In my videos, I talk about great books that I've just read and want to recommend to you while I do my makeup. I'm always excited to talk about the books that I showcase and feature in my videos, but today especially because this author is not a new to me author. I just love her writing. I think she's absolutely brilliant, and the book that I just got finished with is her latest book. The author that I'm talking about is Mia Sheridan. I was first introduced to her when I read Archer's Voice, and if you haven't read that book, oh my gosh, you need to. It is one of my all-time favorite romance novels. It's just a beautiful story about two realistic people on the same playing field. There's no super rich billionaire guy. It's just a heartbreaking love story. It was released several years ago, but it is a book that I have read and reread. It's that good. So I knew when I picked up this new novel of hers that I was going to love it, because every novel that I've read after Archer's Voice has not disappointed me. The novel that I read is called We Were Starlight. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about that book and give you a little inside scoop as to what you should expect if you decide to read it, what the characters are about, who the characters are, and a little bit about the author. I'm also going to use a new to me eyeshadow palette. It's not new. I just got it and I haven't used it, and I've been really excited to use it, but kind of hesitant because in past videos I've explained my track record with eyeshadows from this makeup brand has not been great. So the palette I'm talking about is the Urban Decay Stoned Vibes palette. The metallics are just so pretty. There's only like 4 matte shadows in here, but I'm still gonna try and see what I can create with this. We'll see how that goes. I'm gonna go ahead and put my makeup on, so let's get started. This book opens up in the present time at an awards ceremony in New York City, where a mature Karis is waiting to be presented an award. She's already nervous about the awards ceremony because it's really the first time that she'll be in the spotlight since her past. When she's looking through the crowd, she spots a very familiar face. And as she tries to compose herself with the mixed emotions upon spotting this familiar face, visions of her past are just flooding through her mind. She once loved the man that was staring at her from across the room. In fact, her heart still told her that she still did. As Decay makes his way across the room, he appears to be trying to contain the emotional floodgate himself. And when he approaches Karis, it's clear to see that neither one of them have moved past the feelings that they had for each other, at least not completely. The only thing that Karis knows about Decay as she comes face to face with him is that after the 3 years that they'd spent apart and not speaking, he'd become a successful model. She also knew that he had been in a relationship. And Decay had known that Karis, the last time he had seen her, was committed to be married to somebody. But as they began their reintroduction to each other, Decay quickly learned that Karis wasn't married. As they step away from the crowd, their conversation turned a little bit more intense. Karis couldn't understand why Decay never answered all of her calls so many years ago. Yet here he was on a monumental, important night for her, showing up out of nowhere, only to remind her just how broken her heart still was because of him. But the familiarity and the closeness now between them, it only served to stir up some mental images and emotions from their past that they shared together in Sundara. Sundara was the place where they'd fallen in love completely, yet been broken entirely. They always believed that they were two halves to one star joined together. But when their lips met in a kiss on the balcony of that awards ceremony, Karis knew that she had to pull away because she couldn't let Decay consume her again. We are then transported in the book 7 years before, where Karis and Decay had spent their days in Sundara. From the outside looking in, Sundara was a magical place. It was a place of vibrant, colorful flowers and powerful aromas. But it was also the place where intimacy was put on display. A 17-year-old Karis and a slightly older Decay were just one of the many acts at Sundara. They were twins, or so people who visited there were told. This paradise for some was a prison for the inhabitants inside of Sundara, at least for some of them. Karis looked at this place as her home. This was the place that kept her safe from the outside world. She'd grown up there for as long as she could remember, and she couldn't recall a time in those memories where Decay didn't exist. She thought perhaps they were actually related, but something in her told her that wasn't true. Karis didn't think so because the memories that they had, which were very few for Karis, didn't mirror those of Decay. On that note, I'm going to go put my eyebrows on, and I will be right back. I'm back, and I'm ready to talk a little bit more about this story and finish up my makeup. Inside Sundara, desert was as far as the eye could see, and the master of the kingdom within the walls of Sundara was named Hazik. None of the inhabitants of Sundara, or performers rather, were brave enough to leave that place because Hazik had warned them of the dangers outside the walls. He told them that if they dared try to escape, that violence would ensue, and most likely their death. While Karis was content with heeding that warning, Decay, however, was not convinced. He just needed a plan to get them out safely, and he was willing to risk his entire life in order to do that, because he would die trying in order to protect Karis. While they were living within the walls of Sundara, the leader, or the master of the place, Hazik, had made all of the performers believe that they had choice. Their choice was within their limitations. But the one choice that they didn't have was whether or not to perform. That was required. All of the acts that were performed in this place were all sexual in nature. And although Decay and Karis were required to perform together, their sexual intimacy and their connection actually came naturally. Karis and Decay had always given the crowd and the people who came to see the shows a taste of the intimacy and the connection that they shared, but they never gave the crowd the full picture of the connection that they shared off stage. Of all of the performers that came and went to Sundara, they were brought there because they owed a debt to Hazik. When they would pay off their debts, they would be able to leave. So because Karis and Decay had been there so long, and because performers were always coming and going, Karis was able to befriend a lot of people. And what was different about this place called Sundara was that all of the performers had some kind of physical oddity. People would flock to Sundara in order to see sexual acts of a taboo variety. Even though all of these performers had physical oddities that oftentimes people would make fun of or ridicule, Karis grew to deeply love these people as her family. Some of them, when they came to Sundara, would bring with them a lot of stories from the outside world. And Karis looked forward to hearing stories because she had no memories of a world outside of Sundara. But none of the stories that the performers ever brought with them regarding the outside world were ever appealing. In fact, a lot of them involved terrible incidents that happened to the performers that inevitably led them to this place called Sundara. And if anything, these performers' stories kind of perpetuated Karis's hesitance about leaving the safe walls of Sundara. Karis kind of appreciated the stories that people would tell her because they weren't allowed to read books. She couldn't read or write. And to her, these stories were the best that she could get. Oftentimes, when crowds would come to watch the performances, she would hear small murmurings and chatter from the guests that came to watch the shows. If she happened to hear their name, she would draw pictures in order to illustrate the names of the people who came to see the shows. And because she wasn't allowed to have pen or paper, she had treasured the few sheets of paper and pen that she had confiscated from Haziq's office. So Karis was pretty content on her ability to illustrate stories with pictures until one day the plane that regularly brought people into Sundara brought in a new performer. And this new performer's name was Ahmad. And Karis was immediately enthusiastic because Ahmad had an oddity that she'd never seen before. He was a dwarf. At first, she didn't know that's what he was. She had thought it was a child. But once she was told that he was a dwarf, Karis became very intrigued. And with him, he brought a monkey. And it wasn't just any ordinary monkey. It was a little monkey who did tricks. So like every other performer that came to Sundara, Karis quickly grew to love her new friends. And after Ahmad had grown comfortable with Karis, he offered to teach her how to read and write. So this new friend that Karis had made in Ahmad and his pet monkey turned into being something that she would look forward to every day when she was at Sundara. She would go to the courtyards and he would teach her how to read in the books that he had secretly brought with him, and would teach her how to write in the sand that covered the stone in the courtyard so that it could be quickly swept away without Haziq seeing what they were doing. But the story took a very dark turn as Haziq grew more violent in his expectations of the performers who lived there. The greedy man that he was placed his own twisted ideas as priorities over the limitations of the performers. And Karis learned very quickly during that time, Sundara was more of a prison than the home that she'd grown to love. Karis and Decay's relationship was intensely intimate, as that was really the only way they had grown to know each other. They were both so fiercely protective of each other and had never really known much of a life apart from each other. And it wasn't until they were away from Sundara that their connection and their relationship was tested. They quickly found in being outside the walls of Sundara that they had been deceived about a lot of things. They found that the world outside of Sundara was full of possibilities that they were not even aware of. But their sheltered life within this sexual kingdom had left them very ill prepared to handle any kind of normal life outside of those walls. I'm going to go finish my makeup off camera, and then I'll be back to talk a little bit more about the book and what my thoughts are. So I will be right back. I am back and my makeup is done, and before I get into the book, Urban Decay, I will probably only use the shimmers in this palette. I don't know what it is with Urban Decay matte eyeshadows, but it's like they disappear. It's like disappearing ink on my skin. And I was using dark purples. There's no reason why they shouldn't have shown up a little bit more vibrant than it did, and I had to play with it for a while just to look like this. It looks more pink than anything. So I did like the shimmers. I think the shimmers are really good, but thankfully there's only 4 matte shades in this palette because I'd be so disappointed. Back to where we left off on the story. Once Karis and Decay were out of Sundara, they found out that not only were they not twins, but they weren't even related, which was a relief to them considering they were incredibly intimate with each other. But with that information brought on an entirely new set of hurdles. They were now going to be thrust into a new life without each other because Karis was technically underage, Decay was an adult, and after they had left Sundara and come to America, him being with her was frowned upon. They could no longer have the kind of relationship that they did. So as they tried to navigate through this new life where their former relationship was no longer appropriate, they were no longer able to connect in the ways that they once did. They knew they still loved each other deeply, but every obstacle they were facing now dictated they could no longer be the Karis and Decay that they once were. This novel was filled with so much real-life heartache. I mean, usually in a typical romance story, the conflict comes along in the story because there's always conflict. But usually that conflict comes along in the story at the tail end when the two people are at the height of their happiness. But Decay and Karis' story was filled with impossible conflict from day one due to the nature of what they had been through together. But what they went through together in the beginning really only strengthened their connection in the end, because at the end of the day, outsiders would never be able to understand what made them the person that they are except for each other. And because of what they went through together, it made the conflict and the resolution of that conflict so much more gratifying to read. I really thought it was so incredible to me to see Karis' journey into womanhood and into her own strength throughout the story. Within so much of the story, and especially in the beginning, Karis relied heavily on Decay for strength. He protected her from a lot of unpleasant situations that they had to deal with. But as the story progressed, she realized that she didn't need to fall on a man for strength. She could find it on her own and stand on her own 2 feet in the world. What I thought was really fascinating to me, and because I'm a bookworm, I really thought that this story kind of reminded me of Life of Pi in a way, It reminded me a lot of the whimsical color and imagery in Pye's recollection of events during the tragedy in which he was going through in his story. And he was able to find beauty within that tragedy, and that helped him survive. And I felt like it was a lot like what Karis did. You know, a lot of people thought she was naive because she called Sundara home and she always saw the good in people. I think that was just her survival instincts. Like I said earlier in my video, Mia Sheridan is an author that I absolutely love. She has an incredible way of weaving the most heartbreaking and desolate of circumstances into the most beautiful and inspiring story of hope and love. One of my most prized book possessions is my paperback copy of Archer's Voice. Through her writing, she made me believe love still existed even through the most difficult time of my life. She is a New York Times, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. If I'm not mistaken, I think she's written around 22 books. But what I do know for sure is that I have never read a book of hers that I didn't love. I honestly think that she's an author that hasn't gotten the notoriety that she deserves with the incredible writing that she does. This book is available on Kindle Unlimited, and that is how I read it. You should check it out. Give her a try if you've never read anything by her. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. And even if you don't think that this story sounds like your cup of tea just based on what I've told you about it, I promise you, there is one that you will connect with and you will fall in love with. I hope you like this video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I will always be bringing you more book recommendations and more makeup. Even if you don't like makeup, you can just watch me struggle with it and fail sometimes if that's your thing. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll have a great week. And if you have any book recommendations for me, any books that you think that I might like, please let me know in the comments down below. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.